Wasabi guys, welcome back to another top 10 commander video. This time we'll be talking about my picks for the 10 best budget commanders for 2022. As always, if you appreciate these videos or any videos I create, subscribe to the channel for more. Here are my recommendations for the top 10 best, in my opinion, budget commanders that aren't going to break the bank if you're looking to build your first commander deck outside of a precon, or using a precon adding to it. The point is with these commanders, to build a good deck you shouldn't have to spend $100 or more. In fact, for most of these you can spend much less than that and even less than the average cost of a precon deck. My criteria is pretty simple when recommending budget commanders. I want a commander option that itself is pretty cheap, and also the deck that you could build around it could remain cheap without having to include any cards that are $5 or more. And I am going to be favoring more recent commander options. We could go back in time and all sorts of awesome commanders for the purposes of building a budget deck, but I think for the current meta I would rather recommend some newer commander options, not really going back further than a few years. Number 10, I have Finn the Fangbearer. You can build a dirt cheap commander deck around this one, because all you're doing is throwing in a bunch of common and uncommon creatures that happen to have death touch. Commons and uncommons not really costing you much more than 25 cents. So whenever a creature you control with death touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. The problem with Infect and Commander for a long time is that everyone could see it coming, so racing to those 10 poison counters was a much harder task as the format started to mature, making it so they get 2 poison counters instead. While it isn't going to make it that much easier, you are benefited by the fact that the commander is only 2 mana, so on average you're spending a lot less mana to get your strategy moving. It's not my first recommendation for new players because the way you approach combat when you're trying to infect players versus normal combat when you're just trying to get to commander damage or bring them down from 40 to 0 is totally different. The pacing is more aggressive because you are putting your opponents on a clock, and if you're not aggressive enough, you're just not going to win. Number 9, I have Lathril, Blade of the Elves. Granted, we do have a lot of expensive elves, and if you want to get the most out of Lathril, you're going to want to play really expensive commons like Priest of Titania, but on a budget, we have just a ton of elf support, and because Lathril herself is the entire strategy, the entire goal here is to just get more elf warrior tokens and use those numbers to then tap 10 of your untapped elves to drain your opponent's lives. You're not really asking that much out of your other elves. So long as you have elves, that's what makes Lathril work as a commander. This is a precon commander option too, so not exactly hard to find those sealed, and you can take that deck, which is already filled with a lot of good budget elves, and continue adding more synergy. This is where you're going to notice there's a trade-off here with a lot of budget commanders. The versatility is sometimes limited like this, where you know you're only going to be playing elves here, and with Finn you know you were only going to be playing death touch and things that synergize with poison. So there's not much wiggle room, but still, if you're looking to build a cheap deck that can be on average even cheaper than most precons, you have another great commander here. Number 8, we have Volo, Guide to Monsters. This is the exact opposite, where we have a very flexible commander that is also great on a budget. It's as simple as playing as many different creature types as you can, and in blue and green you have a ton of different creature types to choose. Build yourself a good stuff deck, which just means playing a lot of really good creatures. So long as they all have different creature types, you're doing exactly what you need to do with Volo. And what you'll notice with a lot of good commanders is that they'll tend to be around the 4 mana range. And because Volo is versatile, you have plenty of room to upgrade for the future. So if you want to throw in better green and blue creatures, you could certainly do that and make the deck significantly stronger. Copying anything is really good. Copying creature spells is insane. Number 7 is Shirakai Genesis Engine, another precon option. But what really appealed to me is, again, you have another great 4 mana commander option. You have a bit of an engine here, which is to no one's surprise because, you know, it's called Shirakai Genesis Engine, but that ability is really strong in combination with a lot of artifact strategies where you would typically want to focus on bringing back artifacts from your graveyard to your hand. Those already existed, so you combine vehicles which weren't super strong before in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, but with this set you received insane amounts of support, making a vehicle-focused commander deck even more viable. Don't even really worry about the crew cost because that's going to be made a lot easier. Not only do you get good card draw and a loot ability, but you're given these 1/1 colorless pilots that can crew vehicles as though their power were 2 greater, so in most cases they'll be crewing things like their 3/3s. It also doesn't hurt that up to this point vehicles have been dirt cheap. You do have some exceptions to that. Unlicensed Hearse is a good example where, because of the current metas in Pioneer, Standard, and even Legacy, that's seeing $10+. But just about every other vehicle is going to be very affordable because it's a very specific strategy to continue that trend where a good budget commander is a good budget commander because people get really excited about got a niche strategy and they get a little fatigued and put it down. This is that kind of commander. Great on a budget, long-term flexibility, maybe not so. Number 6 is Millicent, Restless, Revenant. Another pre-con commander option, this time from Crimson Vow. There are so many different spirit creatures, and especially in 2 different colors, it's not even funny. And if you're looking at the mana cost and saying, hey, Commander Void, I thought you just said 4 mana was the sweet spot. Well, Millicent does have insane cost reduction, costing 1 less to cast for each spirit you already control, so you wouldn't really need much more than a few of them to get great value out of her. Whenever Millicent, Restless, Revenant, or another non-token spirit you control dies or deals combat damage to a player, you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. This is why this commander can be a great budget one, and also a real PITA. Similarly to Lathril, we have another commander that just enables itself. You mean to tell me the trigger will get you more spirits that'll make it easier for you whenever you feel like recasting Millicent after a removal spell? So the rest of my deck doesn't really have to be much more than just good stuff spirits? That is very appealing, very easy to build on a budget. You could spend maybe $40 to $50 and make yourself a really good spirit deck, because outside of directly just getting those spirit tokens, your spirits don't have to be anything special. They just have to exist. Number 5, we have Cephas of the Hidden Ways. This is one of my favorite commander options from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and I like it because it is incredibly specific. I thought going into Battle for Baldur's Gate, we would surely get even more support for the dungeons, and while we did get some of it, it just didn't really feel satisfactory. So Cephas is going to continue being one of the better budget options. It's not like with Prosper Tomebound where they continue having high value, play from exile cards, treasure token cards. That commander option from this set is incredibly expensive to build around, and even itself it's a little bit more expensive than Cephas. Here you have access to 3 colors. Personally, I would say that makes Cephas maybe the best budget commander option, because while the abilities might have a bit of a learning curve for someone who doesn't understand dungeons, and I don't blame you, it's not super common, the commander here is all about card advantage, it's all about an engine. There wasn't a single game where I played Cephas where I wasn't doing something, and spending a decent amount of time during my turn, getting just tons and tons of triggers. And a habit that I have when playing with precon commanders is that I don't just immediately upgrade the precons. I like to see how they play out of the box, and then I might make a couple adjustments. Usually it's taking out the secondary commanders and some other cards that just aren't good in precons, and I'll see how competitive it could potentially be while adding the fewest cards possible. Cephas is one of those commanders, I swear, that you won't really have to upgrade that much, which makes it a great budget alternative. The precon should still be easy to find, and you just have some of the most unique cards in the game that are still incredibly cheap. Number 4, we have the oldest card here, but it's not that old. It's Feather the Redeemed. Feather is worth mentioning and recommending even 3 years later because the strategy is so unique and also pretty busted. To build this on a budget, you really don't have to do anything else outside of finding good value red and white instants that just happen to target Feather. This is the perfection of a strategy that was really formed with the commander option Zada Hadron Grinder, where Zada's whole ability was just getting more value out of little common red instants that would target one creature, and while it doesn't copy it for each of your other creatures, you're basically never losing it with Feather. You get to keep those cards, you get to basically return them back to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So card advantage like this in Boros is very user-friendly. Way too often with commander decks in these colors, you'll find that your hand is just empty most of the game. Boros is usually all gas and no ass. Feather the Redeemed is the exception. Number 3, we have Cyphis Harvest's Hand. This is such a great commander, and I've said this several times, because it doesn't really matter how competitively you want to build around her. You can make a deck around her as cheap as possible. It's what I loved about Karametra God of Harvests. All you're focusing on is getting a trigger and accumulating resources. Granted, the hardest part about building this on a budget would be finding a good win con, but even if you go deep into a game without finding any strong win con, you're still holding your own. You're still building a board. You're still filling your hand, and your life total is still likely pretty good. And it's ridiculous that this commander's been out for a year already. Everybody knows about her, everybody knows how popular she's become, and she's still not that expensive. I'm guessing that's because Modern Horizons 2 doesn't have a premium, so we'll just have to wait and see, but currently right now, there are dirt cheap decks you can build around Cyphis, and you have a lot of flexibility with enchantments. It's not that narrow as you might think. Number 2 is Lightpaw's Emperor's Voice. This commander is ridiculous. All you're doing here is gaining a ton of power through auras, getting good protection auras, getting good keyword auras, and dealing a ton of damage for Voltron. You're just getting a lot more power every single time you play an aura, making Light Paws a very appealing Voltron option, which is something I would like to mention. Hasn't been encouraged in recent commander products. It's kind of an older school strategy now. Most commanders nowadays are not as focused on dealing as much damage as possible by making it easier to throw equipments and auras onto them. And being only 2 mana in white, you're not overspending in a color that really has a harder time keeping up in mana. I would like to compare this to the commander option Zur the Enchanter, which is a much older commander that you could still build on a budget and I would recommend it. But for 2022, Light Paws has been one of the most satisfying commanders to play with, because it solves another weakness in white, and that is being able to recover late game. You might have a great board presence, but then someone plays a removal spell, gets rid of all of your auras, and then suddenly you're SOL. But not with Light Paws. All you need with Light Paws is to cast another aura, and then you can search for another one. You're getting a 2-for-1 every time you do this. This is a bit more user-friendly than a lot of other commanders I've shown you so far, like Cephas and Finn the Fangbearer. If you were to build a deck around Light Paws, you wouldn't have to spend that much money, and you could give it to someone who's new to the game, and all they would have to focus on is finding an aura that's cheaper than the one they just played. It's that easy. They go to combat, that's how they win. Before we move on to number 1, let's talk about some honorable mentions. Again, because this list was more about newer cards, I have to mention some older ones like Carador Ghost Chieftain. This commander here is still a fantastic budget option, even 10 plus years after the fact. You have access to 3 colors, and you have a ton of creatures that sacrifice themselves for great payoffs, so it makes building Carador in 2022 a breeze. The Locust God isn't super old, but 2017 is 5 years ago. Another very easy to play and understand commander. It's all about getting those insect tokens every time you draw a card. Very good recovery because he's always returning himself to your hand. And Alayla, Artful Provocateur, would be in this video if I didn't already mention her a ton over the past couple years, and I don't really want to recommend the same commander option too often, but it's another one that's very easy to understand, very easy to build around, and incredibly flexible. So number 1, my pick for the best budget commander option in 2022 is Lysa, Shroud of Dusk. We have another really busted commander that can be as busted as you're looking to make it. It could also be as budget friendly as you want to make it. Dodging the commander tax is one of the most powerful things you can do, and with Lysa, it is built in. Instead of paying that 2 mana every time to replay her, you're just paying 2 life that many times. This is on a Flying Angel with a lifelink, so right there it shouldn't be difficult to recover some life loss. What I really love about Lysa and why I recommend her to people who want to play on the cheap, we're talking 25-cent life gain cards that all they do is recover some life loss. You have amazing cards in the bright colors to make playing this commander on a budget very satisfying. You have some very cheap affordable win cons in this strategy as well. Grey Merchant of Asphodel has been one of the best commons forever, and it fits right in here with the strategy. Whenever a player casts a spell, they lose 2 life. It hurts you, but if you build the deck the way I recommend, it really should just even out for you and make it so your opponent's life totals are just constantly grinding down. So that will do it for today's video, the 10 best budget commander options for 2022. As always, if you have not, please subscribe to the channel. I appreciate it. We are getting closer and closer to 40,000 subs. That's a big milestone, almost double where we were last year. Commander Void here signing off. I will see you all next time.